Thank you everyone for being here tonight. Thank you to all those that have spoken tonight, total experts on the NHS Workers delivering that service day in and day out, with bravery, with courage, with skill and determination. Thank you, John, for your determination and your passion to speak up for the National Health Service. It's going to be so good when you're the Secretary of State for Health, looking after people's health rather than privatising. And could I just say thank you also to all those that campaign for their NHS all over the country, to defend local hospitals, local services, to stand with NHS workers, to make demands on local government and health of the kind of service that they would want in the future. And, if I may say so, a big thank you to the Labour Party staff that organised tonight's event so efficiently and got you all here tonight for this event. And all of you that have shown your determination to support our National Health Service for being here tonight. And as John quite correctly pointed out, this is the 70th anniversary year of the National Health Service. In this very hall, in 1945, when that Labour government had delivered an amazing election result, they started off as outsiders. They were written off by all the media. They were told it was a waste of time. The Tories were bound to triumph and that they may as well give up and go home. And they got a massive swing to Labour. They gave us a very large parliamentary majority, and they gave us Attlee as Prime Minister and the government that followed. The media might write off those that campaign for socialism and social justice, but I tell you what, out there, on every street and every town and every village, people know that the National Health Service is socialism in action. And Clement Attlee, in his own dour way, set up his cabinet and appointed, to the surprise of many, Aneurin Bevan as the Minister for Health, the Secretary of State for Health and also of Housing at that time. Nye, a miner, Nye who had seen the injustices of the coalfield communities in South Wales, had seen the injustices where the miners themselves collected money to set up a welfare to care for their own communities. Nye, who had seen all of that, was utterly determined that that Labour government would build an NHS and build houses for the people. When it came to housing, he was told, make it cheap, do it quick, put it up, it'll be done. He said, no, we will build to the highest possible standards, the best quality council housing we can. You look at those 1940s built council estates, they're still there today because they were properly built in the first place. And Nye was also determined that we would have a national health service because he wanted the same quality of healthcare to be available to everybody all across the country, because he'd seen the patchwork of services that were available before, where you had a progressive local authority, there was sometimes quite a lot of healthcare. In other places, there was none whatsoever, but all of them relied essentially on the individual having to pay something towards it. And it was Nye who said this, when it was argued against by the Tories. Yes, the Tories were very opposed to a free health service. Can't imagine why. Maybe it's something in their genes. He said, a free health service is a triumphant example of the superiority of collective action and public initiative applied to a segment of society where commercial principles are seen at their worst. Well done, Nye, for the way that you put it. Because Nye was saying that the principle of profit at the expense of everything was simply wrong. Healthcare should be a human right, free at the point of need for everybody. And our wonderful speakers who've described the highs and lows of their time in the National Health Service will also know that very poignant moment when a baby is born and they're given their NHS number. Healthcare for the rest of their lives, our down payment for their care for the whole of their lives. We are never going to have a charging NHS. We are not going down the insurance road. We're staying with the National Health Service route. And what John quite rightly talked about was health inequalities across this country. You could take a trip on the District Line in London. You could board your train at Richmond in the southwest, and you could travel all the way through the centre of London, through the East End, and far out the other side. During that journey, your life expectancy would fall and fall and fall and fall, and then rise again when you got to the end of that line. You could say the same about a bus route across any city in this country. And in some parts of this country, I'm appalled and ashamed to say that life expectancy is static or even falling. Yet medical care, medical research, and the ability to care for people is improving. But shortages in the NHS, 4 million people waiting, sometimes in considerable discomfort or pain for operations, pay a price. Those living in poor quality housing pay a price. Don't tell me that a child born in an insecure, private rented flat in inner London, inner Leicester, inner Birmingham, or anywhere else that may have to change schools several times during their school career, may get ill quite often because they're sharing a bedroom with 2 or 3 siblings. Their parents accessing food from a food bank, trying to get by, sometimes sustaining 2 or 3 jobs in order to keep the family together. Don't tell me that kid has got the same life chances as a child born into a wealthier family where there is somebody at home the whole time, where there's plenty of computers, there's food, and there's all the care in the world they need. I want computers and all the care in the world for every child. So that means the challenge for us as the Labour Party, for us as a government in waiting, is about challenging inequality and injustice in our society. So yes, we'd of course fund the health service properly, and I'll come back to that. But we would also be building council homes with secure rent and secure tenancy. We will also be ensuring that air quality improves, environmental conditions improve, so that our children breathe clean air, live in decent homes, can go through and achieve the best in education, so that they can contribute to the rest of our lives and our own living standards. I'll tell you what, poverty is such a waste. It's a waste of the lives of the people living in poverty, but it's also a waste of opportunity for all of us. Those children growing up in such poverty and underachieving, they're not likely to be the doctors and the engineers and the plumbers and the electricians and the teachers and the nurses and all the other professions that we want in the future. They're not going to be able to achieve what they want, and we won't have the benefit of their skill and their expertise. The Tories don't understand this. We invest in people, and their possibilities of what they can do for us. And I'm determined that we are going to bring it on to win that election, to deliver for the people of this country. Because healthcare and our attitudes towards healthcare are really our attitudes towards society as a whole. On the 20th of December, I decided that it would be a good idea to ask the Prime Minister a few questions about health. And I did. And John and I sat there and we put the questions to her. And there was one answer she gave me, it's been ringing in my ears ever since. She said, the NHS is better prepared than ever to deal with the winter crisis. And John and I looked at each other and said, did she say that? Did she really say that? Yeah, she did. It's on the record. Hansard never lies. It's there. And she claimed that to be the case. And what have we had since then? Whole shifts of nurses in A&E departments never even getting into the department because they're treating patients in the back of an ambulance in the hospital car park. People getting cold in those ambulances while nurses are desperately trying to help them. The ambulance crew livid with frustration. They can see on their screens the demands down the road. Somebody with a heart attack, somebody with a stroke, an accident, somebody fallen over, somebody gone unconscious, a baby in desperate straits. And they know it's their job, their responsibility, and their vocation to get there and help that person. They can't even leave the car park because there's nowhere for the patient to go to get into the hospital. And that's the best prepared ever for the winter crisis. And then you look at the reasons for it. 14,000 hospital beds lost since 2010. Most hospitals running a deficit. Tens of thousands of nurse vacancies across this country. And deeply stressed out NHS staff, some of whom can cope no longer and leave. And then you look at the wider issue of those people that cannot leave hospital because they've got nowhere to go, because the social care system cannot cope with their needs, because there's nowhere to put them. So there's people staying in hospital longer than they should, and there's people who need to get into hospital immediately and can't. It's a pretty bad situation. And so we have to link together the issue of hospital care, the NHS and GPs, with also the need for adequate social care across the whole country. And I support care workers. I think they're often the most exploited and downtrodden people working anywhere within the public sector. Most working on minimum wage with a huge sense of care and responsibility, and often not even paid for travelling between one client and another. I remember talking to a man who was caring for a friend of mine, who sadly has now passed on, and he was the most wonderful, caring individual you could want to meet. And he was looking after my friend, and then I asked him where his next appointment was, and he told me it was quite some distance away. I said, okay, how are you going to get there? He said, well, I'll probably walk because it's cheaper that way, but I don't get paid for the time between appointments. And so you would end up working for very long hours, 14 hours a day, going between appointments for which he's not paid for that time. And then he was so concerned about the inadequate time being given to some of his clients, he was going back to them unpaid at the end of his shift to check if they were all right. That is the story of the decent humanity of ordinary people doing an extraordinary job for which they're not properly rewarded. So we are determined to deal with the social care crisis as well by properly funding it. Absolutely properly funding it to make sure that every family doesn't get fearful of somebody getting dementia and having to sell their home, having to go into all kinds of debt just to make sure they're all right. Surely, as a society, we can do a bit better than that. If the best the Tories can come up with is a dementia tax, move out of the way and let Labour take over, and we'll do it a bit differently and a bit better. Debbie made a very strong point about mental health and about her stress that she'd been through, and I salute her for saying that, and salute her for the bravery of telling us all about it. Because we're a big hall here, we're a big audience here. A quarter of us are going to go through a process of deep stress, mental health condition in our lifetimes. There's no shame in it. It happens. It happens for lots of reasons. We're under stress through poverty, under stress through bad housing, under stress at work, under stress financial, lots of reasons. Many people go through all this stress. Many go through it alone, and sadly, many, particularly young men, take their own lives because they don't feel able to talk to anybody about it. It's the biggest cause of death amongst young people, young men, is sadly suicide. It's a serious situation. We cannot go on underfunding our mental health services, telling people that have come forward to ask for help and support and get therapy, they've got to wait 6 months before they get talking therapy. It's not good enough. We've got to have a service that's there for all people. And we've got to have a service that's there, particularly for young people in school and college and university, so that they can share their stress and share their concerns and get the help they need to get through it. But we can all do something as well. We can support people, we can support each other, and when people start making jokes about people with stress and mental health conditions, stop them, challenge them, call them out, and say, it's up to all of us to be strong enough to care. And so, the NHS this year celebrates its 70th anniversary. We've got this rally tonight to start that year of campaigning off. But it's going to be a year of campaigning to develop our policies, yes, to challenge what the government is doing on the NHS, but to remember those that brought it about. And we will be holding a big event in Tredegar, in Nye Bevan's former constituency, and there's going to be a lot of NHS events over the year, because they give a message out about what we're about what NHS is about, and about what the kind of society is that we want to live in. This government offered hardly any money at all compared to what's needed, and I described it to the Prime Minister this week as thin gruel spent over 2 years. It's not enough. The NHS needs urgent funding in order to stem the flow of people leaving, to fund social care properly, and to ensure that where necessary, hospital beds are reopened. And John's offer of suspending the sustainability and transformation plans and looking again at them, I think, is a very important and very sensible offer that he's made. But there are some people that have done quite well out of the NHS, and the Health and Social Care Act made sure they did. It's a vehicle for contracting out and privatization. This big increase in the number of companies that are involved in delivering NHS services, creaming off a profit in the process, often paying their staff different wages and conditions to NHS staff, thus creating a two-tier workforce in the same building, and the inefficiencies that go with it. We will not be privatising the NHS. We will not be franchising out NHS services. We'll be a government that wants a national health service to be publicly owned, publicly run, and publicly accountable to all of us. And so it will fall to a Labour government that will challenge the economic narrative of this government. We've had 7 years of austerity. We've had 7 years of frozen wages. We've had 7 years of cuts in local government expenditure. We've had 7 years of frozen, in some cases, cut benefits within our social security system. We've had universal credit brought in. And what's the result of all this? What is the result of all this? Stress amongst many people, lower wages or frozen wages for many people, and at the extremes, what is it? Homeless people sleeping on our streets. There are maybe 15,000 people sleeping on the streets now. A combination of lack of housing, universal credit, and all the stress that goes with it will increase those numbers. Are we going to let this government stay in forever while they raise the number of homeless people? I don't want to live in a society that walks by on the other side past the homeless and directs them towards a food bank. I want to live in a society where we take pride in our ability to care for, support each other, and invest in a growing economy with decent, good quality, manufacturing industry jobs for all that need to get them. And so, there's a choice. There's a choice. Does the Tory government just carry on in office with all that I've described and many other things that they do? This out-of-touch Tory government that's more interested in tax write-offs, privatization, more interested in looking after their own than looking after the rest of us. Their response to the Carillion crisis said it all. I'm asking the Prime Minister, what are you doing about Carillion? What are you doing about those that work for Carillion? Those subcontractors that work for contracts headed up by Carillion? Those subcontractors that work on contracts headed up by Carillion? This wildfire spread of job loss all across the construction industry and many others. And she said, well, we're a customer as well. Huh? Well, yes, of course the government is a customer. I fully understand that. They have engaged Carillion in these contracts. But they're also the government that's supposed to regulate and administer the economy to prevent this kind of thing happening and all the damage it does to public services and to people working in it. Do you really want this kind of government to continue in office, or do you want a government with different principles and different priorities there instead? And so, a Labour government would challenge inequality, would raise minimum wage to living wage, would invest in education, wouldn't see our young people saddled with debt because they went to college or university, would see nurses properly supported so that they can continue training to be nurses rather than the debt they now have to go into simply to become a nurse within our National Health Service. And yes, under a Labour government, public ownership would not be a dirty word. I see no reason whatsoever why we, the public, having built the railways, having electrified the railways, having bought the rolling stock for the railways, should then hand over the profitable bits to a private operator, usually Virgin Trains, to run the services. And so, the options before us are demonstrated so well by our attitudes towards the National Health Service. We created the NHS because of our belief that the function of a society is to care for all at all times of their lives. And those that say, well, I really can't be dealing with the NHS, I can afford private medicine, I simply say this to them. One day, you'll be old. One day, you might have a heart attack. One day, you might be mugged and robbed. One day, your home may catch fire. Then, at that point, you will realize that ambulance workers, that doctors, that firefighters, that police officers, paid for by the rest of us, not by those who put their money into tax havens, are actually doing the right thing, and you are doing the wrong thing by trying to evade taxation. So we will deal with the tax havens. We will deal with the tax havens and ensure we have a government and an economy that is interested in social justice, in equality, that wants to help others around the world achieve all those things as well. That's why we exist as a Labour Party. That's why we're so proud of the NHS, and that's why our party, with all its hundreds of thousands of members, is taking that message out, day in, day out, on streets up and down the country, getting that message across that with Labour we're determined to change the way Britain works, to one that is proud when we defeat inequality, that is ashamed when there are fellow citizens with no home to call their own, with children unable to be properly educated because of their poverty, that is ashamed when older people die alone and uncared for. I want to be proud of a country that cares for all. That is the Labour way. Thank you very much. Give us a song. You're going to give us a song.